The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I kept my hands wrapped around the mug anyway. Habit, I guess. Or maybe I just needed something to hold on to. I'm 51 years old. I spent 22 of those years married to a woman I would have walked through fire for. I built something from nothing. 3 commercial properties, a real estate investment company with a solid reputation in the Mid-Atlantic region. The kind of business where people call you back because they trust your word. I did that, and I did it while being a husband, a father, a man who came home every night and never once gave my wife a reason to doubt me. Which is why I'm still trying to understand what happened, not the facts. I know the facts now. I understand the why as much as I ever will. What I still can't fully wrap my head around is how long I just didn't see it. My daughter was the first one to say something. She was 23, sharp as a tack, working her first year at an accounting firm in Baltimore. She came home for Thanksgiving, and we were sitting on the back porch after dinner, just the 2 of us, watching the yard go dark. She said, "Dad, is everything okay with you and Mom?" I asked her why she was asking. She looked at her drink for a second, then at me. "She seems different. I can't explain it, just different." I told her she was overthinking things. "Stress at work," I said. "Your mother has a lot on her plate." My daughter nodded, but she didn't look convinced. I should have paid more attention to that. She was seeing something I was too close to notice. My wife and I had met in our late 20s. She was finishing a graduate degree in urban planning. I was flipping my second property and learning the business from the ground up. We were both people who worked hard and meant what they said, and that felt like enough of a foundation to build on. For a long time it was. We had 2 kids, a daughter and a son. We built the business together in the early years, her handling the administrative side while I managed acquisitions. When she eventually stepped back to raise the kids full-time, it felt like a natural shift. A mutual decision. I never questioned it. By the time the kids were grown, she'd been out of the business for nearly 15 years. She had her routines, her friends, a charity board she sat on, a garden she'd spent a decade perfecting. I had the business. We had a comfortable life in a brick colonial in Northern Virginia that we'd bought in 2009 and renovated over several years. We'd never been the kind of couple who told each other everything. We were private people, both of us. I thought that was maturity. I thought that was what a long marriage looks like from the inside. What I didn't know was that for at least 3 years, maybe longer, my wife had been routing money out of our joint investment accounts in amounts small enough not to trigger anything obvious. Not tiny amounts, but spaced out, varied, moved through transfers that looked like routine portfolio adjustments on first glance. Our financial advisor managed the accounts, and I reviewed the summaries quarterly. I trusted those summaries the same way you trust a smoke alarm. You know it's there, you assume it works, you don't check the battery until something goes wrong. I also didn't know that several pieces of furniture my parents had left me, a secretary desk from the 1840s, 2 oil paintings from my grandfather's side, a set of silver that had come over from England with my great-grandmother, had been quietly removed from the house. We had a storage unit for overflow furniture. My wife managed it. I hadn't been inside it in years. Looking back, there were things I noticed but didn't clock as significant. The desk disappeared from the study sometime in 2021. She told me it had been moved to storage because she was reconfiguring the room. I didn't follow up. One of the paintings was gone from the upstairs hallway. She said it was being reframed. I never thought to ask where it ended up. I trusted her the way you trust someone after 20 years. Completely in without auditing. In the spring of 2 years ago, she told me she wanted to take a trip to Portugal with a friend from her charity board, a woman she'd known for years. I had no reason to object. She went for 12 days. She came back quieter than usual, but I put that down to the post-travel letdown. She started going to the gym at odd hours. She started having her phone face down on the counter when she was in the kitchen. She started laughing at things on her phone that she didn't share with me. I noticed all of it, and I told myself a story about it that made it mean nothing. My son called me that August. He lived in Denver by then, doing well in software sales. He asked me how things were going, and I said fine, and he said, "You sure? Mom seems a little checked out when I call her." 2 of my kids had now said something. I filed it. It was my accountant who actually broke it open, though not on purpose. He called me in October to go over the year-end projections for the holding company. Routine call. At the end of it, almost as an afterthought, he said, "Hey, are you planning any changes to the Shenandoah account? There's been some movement I wanted to make sure you're aware of." I asked him what he meant. He sent me a report that afternoon. Over the previous 31 months, $340,000 had been transferred out of a joint investment account I rarely monitored, one we'd opened back in 2011 and largely left alone. The transfers were to an external account I didn't recognize. Varied amounts, varied intervals, nothing that would have set off an automatic alert at the threshold we'd configured. I sat at my desk for a long time after I read that. Then I called a private investigator named, well, I don't need to use his name, a former federal agent, recommended by a lawyer friend of mine. I told him I needed to know where that money went and whether there was something personal going on that I needed to understand. I told him I wanted to know the full picture before I said a word to my wife. He said that was the smart way to do it. It took him 11 weeks. He called me on a Thursday morning and said he needed to sit down with me in person, not a phone call. He wanted to come to my office. I knew, in the way you know things, before you know them, that whatever he'd found had changed the shape of everything. He came in, set a folder on my desk, and slid it across. Then he sat back and waited while I opened it. The external account belonged to a man I'd never heard of, 44 years old, worked in commercial architecture, lived in a townhouse in Alexandria that had been purchased 18 months earlier. My wife's name was not on the deed, but the down payment, $87,000, had come from that same investment account. The rest of the transferred money had gone into a joint account my wife shared with this man, opened 14 months ago. There was more. The secretary desk from my study had sold at a private auction for $18,500. One of the oil paintings had gone through an estate dealer in Maryland for $23,000. The other painting and the silver had been sold through the same dealer over a period of 8 months. Total from the antiques, just under $68,000. All of it combined, $408,000. I closed the folder. My investigator said, I want to be straightforward with you. This is the clearest financial picture I've put together in a case like this. The documentation is solid. Whatever you decide to do with it, you're not going into it blind. I asked him if there was any possibility the account access was unauthorized, if someone could have done this without her knowledge. He said he'd considered that. The account opening required her physical presence and identification. The auction house had a record of a woman matching her description, consigning the items in person. There was no version of the evidence that pointed anywhere except at her. I thanked him. I wrote him a check. After he left, I sat at my desk and didn't move for the better part of an hour. I want to be clear about what I felt in that room, because I think people expect a story like this to involve a lot of shouting, or crying, or dramatic confrontation. What I felt was something quieter and more permanent than anger. It was the feeling of a door closing. Not slamming. Closing. The soft click of a latch, and then silence. I didn't go home that night the way I normally would. I drove to my lawyer's office instead. She specialized in family law and had handled matters for 2 of my business partners over the years. I laid everything out. The financial transfers, the antiques, the relationship, the timeline. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, How do you want this to go? I told her I wanted to protect what I'd built, recover what I could, and exit cleanly. She said, Then here's what we do, and here's the order we do it in. Over the next 6 weeks, I did exactly what she told me. I had a forensic accountant go through every joint account, every shared asset, every filing for the past 4 years. I documented the antiques through photographs I'd taken over the years. Holiday pictures, family photos where the desk was in the background, the silver on the table at Christmas dinner. My lawyer contacted the estate dealer with documentation establishing clear provenance and prior ownership under the circumstances. With fraud involved in the consignment, 2 of the 4 pieces were recoverable. The dealer cooperated fully once presented with the paperwork. The desk and one of the paintings came back. I had the holding company restructured. The investment accounts were separated. The marital home, still owned jointly, was assessed. I did all of this without saying a single word to my wife about what I knew. I want people to understand that wasn't easy. I came home every night. I sat across from her at dinner. I answered when she spoke to me. I watched her check her phone under the table, and I said nothing. There was one evening in November when she was in particularly good spirits, laughing at something, light in a way she hadn't seemed in months. And I realized she thought everything was fine. She thought I had no idea. She was happy. That was the hardest moment. Not because it made me angrier, but because it made everything real in a way the documents hadn't quite managed. My lawyer filed in December, the week before Christmas. My wife was served at the house on a Tuesday morning while I was at the office. She called me 6 times that day. I let it go to voicemail each time. That evening, I answered. She asked me why I had done it this way, why I hadn't come to her, hadn't talked to her, hadn't given her a chance to explain. I asked her what she would have explained. A long silence. I told her my lawyer would be in touch with hers, and that if she wanted to resolve this without extended litigation, the most sensible path was to cooperate with the discovery process fully. I told her the forensic documentation was comprehensive. I told her that the estate dealer had already provided a signed affidavit. Another silence. Then she said my name in a way that was supposed to mean something. I said goodnight, and I hung up. My lawyer was good at her job. The financial fraud claim was substantive. $340,000 moved from a marital account to fund another man's housing, and a joint account her husband knew nothing about, is not a gray area. The antiques claim was solid. The opposing counsel, to his credit, did not try to pretend otherwise. He recommended settlement within the first month of discovery. Under the final agreement, I retained the house, which I subsequently sold. I retained the holding company and all associated assets. I received a settlement that covered the transferred funds, with the exception of a portion that was genuinely unrecoverable because it had been spent. The 2 recovered antiques came back to me. The other 2 were compensated through the settlement at fair market value. She received what she was legally entitled to from 22 years of marriage under Virginia law, minus the fraud offset. It was considerably less than she had apparently expected. The man in Alexandria. I won't say much about him. My lawyer advised me not to pursue a separate civil action against him, and I took that advice. What I will say is that his name appeared in my forensic accountant's report, and that once his employer, a mid-size architecture firm, received a copy of that report through proper channels related to the case, certain professional complications arose for him. I had nothing to do with that directly. These things have a way of finding their own level. My daughter flew in from Baltimore the week after the filing. We sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She didn't say much. At one point she said, "I should have pushed harder when I said something at Thanksgiving." I told her it wouldn't have changed anything. I needed to see it myself. And even then, I needed to see it completely before I did anything about it. She said she was proud of me, and I told her that was a strange thing to be proud of someone. And she said, not for the divorce, Dad, for not falling apart. My son called from Denver. He was angrier than I expected, angry at his mother in a way I found I had to gently moderate, which was a strange position to be in. I told him that people are complicated, and that what she'd done was a choice, but that the choice didn't erase 22 years or make her someone entirely different from the woman who raised him. He took a while to accept that. He's still working on it, I think. I moved into an apartment in Arlington in February. Smaller than I'd lived in since my 30s, but I found I liked the quiet of it. No garden, no equity project, no evidence of anyone else's choices built into the walls, just a place that was mine. I kept working. The business had a strong first quarter and a better second. My reputation in the market hadn't suffered. A few people knew, the way people always know eventually, but no one raised it directly, which is the professional courtesy you hope for and don't always get. There was one thing I've thought about since, that I want to say because I think it matters. The money is the part of the story that has a number attached to it, so it becomes the headline. But what I actually lost wasn't the $340,000, or even the antiques. What I lost was the story I'd been telling myself about my life, the version where my wife and I had built something together, quietly and without much drama, and where the foundation was solid, even if we weren't particularly demonstrative about it. That story was comfortable. I'd been living inside it for a long time without checking whether it was still true. I don't know exactly when it stopped being true. I've tried to trace it back and I can't find a clean origin point. Probably there isn't one. These things tend to fray from the edges rather than break from the center. What I do know is this. I'm 51. I have 2 kids. We're decent people. A business I built from scratch that is still standing, and an apartment in Arlington where I drink my coffee hot because there's no one to interrupt me while it's still warm. There's a version of this story where that sounds like loss. I understand why. But sitting here, I find I don't experience it that way. She asked me once, near the end, whether I hated her. It was a phone call, a few weeks after everything was finalized. I think she'd been drinking. I think she wanted to hear something that would let her off the hook, or put me in the wrong, or at least make the ending more symmetrical. I told her I didn't hate her. I told her the truth, which is that I'd spent a lot of time over the previous months trying to locate something that resembled hatred, and I hadn't quite managed it. What I found instead was simpler and harder to explain. Something like grief, and then, on the far side of that, something that felt a lot like clarity. She didn't say anything to that. I told her I hoped she figured out whatever it was she'd been looking for. Then I said goodnight, and I meant it, and I haven't spoken to her since. I've thought a lot about the sequence of it. Not the betrayal itself, but the order in which things had to happen for the outcome to be what it was. She made the first move. She opened the account, initiated the transfers, consigned the antiques, built a second life on the margins of the one we shared. And because she moved first, and because I found out before I reacted, I had something she didn't. Time. Time to think clearly instead of just feel. Time to build instead of just break things. That's not luck. I want to be honest about that. A lot of people in the same position would have confronted her the night they saw the report. I understand that impulse completely. But I've come to believe that the gap between what you feel and what you do, that space, however small, is where the outcome actually gets decided. I had to hold myself in that space for 6 weeks. Some nights that was harder than I expected, but I stayed there. My daughter said she was proud of me for not falling apart. I told her that was a strange thing to be proud of someone for. But sitting with it now, I think I understand what she meant. There's a version of this story where I go home that night and say everything I'm thinking and blow up whatever legal leverage I have and hand her the narrative. I almost did that. The difference between almost and didn't is something I'd call discipline, though it felt less noble than that in the moment. It felt like sitting on your hands. It felt like swallowing something sharp. What I've learned, really learned, not the kind of thing you say you've learned, is that integrity isn't just about what you won't do. It's about what you still do when you have every reason not to. I kept my word to people who counted on me at work while my personal life was quietly collapsing. I showed up. I paid attention, not because I felt like it, but because those people deserved it, and because the alternative was letting one person's choices determine the shape of everything else in my life. I wasn't willing to give her that. The practical side of this, the forensic accounting, the documentation, the 6 weeks of silence, that required a kind of thinking I had to work to access. I'm not someone who naturally operates in a cold register. I had to choose it deliberately, repeatedly, every time the other feeling came up. My accountant, my lawyer, the investigator, they gave me tools, but I had to be clear-headed enough to use them and honest enough about my own situation to follow advice instead of instinct. 22 years is a long time to invest in something. There's grief in that number. I won't pretend otherwise, but I also know that the same qualities that let me build a business from nothing, the willingness to keep working when it's hard, to make decisions based on facts rather than what I wish were true, to hold myself to a standard even when no one's watching. Those qualities didn't disappear when she decided to leave. They're still mine. She couldn't move those. My son is still working through his anger. I get that. I hope he gets to the other side of it. What I'd tell him, if he were ready to hear it, is that the way you respond to being wronged is one of the few things in your life that's entirely yours. It doesn't depend on what she did, or what he does, or what anyone else decides. It's just yours. I'm 51, living in an apartment in Arlington, drinking hot coffee in the morning. That's enough. More than enough, actually. It took me a while to see it that way, but I do now.